There is something fascinating about old, strange graves and the tombstones with epitaphs that freeze eerie messages into time. Even more interesting are the histories associated with the people in those graves. Histories with enough details to wildly spark our curiosity and imagination. We've compiled great examples of some of the strangest graves and the stories behind them. Number 5. Kitty J's Grave. The story of Kitty J's grave begins in the 1700s when a poor young maid hung herself in a barn in Forder, England. It's not clear why Kitty killed herself, but one tale says that she had been raped, while another says she fell in love and became pregnant out of wedlock. Because she was ashamed, she took her own life. As in the tradition of the time, anyone who committed suicide was committing self-murder. Suicide was considered a terrible sin in the 18th century. Therefore, a person who committed suicide would be buried just like executed criminals, at a crossroad. Thus, in a state of confusion, the wicked soul could never return to haunt the living. Today, her grave is marked with a rough headstone and a mound of grass. An interesting detail to the story is that a mysterious person always adorns the grassy mound with flowers. Some people have also reported seeing a dark cloaked figure kneeling at her grave. Others have reported seeing her ghost in the rearview mirror as they drive past the crossroad. Number 4. Herman Harband. If we are to believe this epitaph, poor Herman had a greedy, mean wife who took all of his money, tried to poison him, and literally left him in the dark. As it turns out, according to the Find a Grave website, Herman was not really buried here. Supposedly, he owned a cemetery plot in this spot at the Beth David Memorial Gardens, and after he died, someone felt compelled to spend the money for the stone and erect it here. Herman's body actually lies elsewhere. Also, according to Find a Grave, his wife sold the empty plot back to the cemetery and they took the stone down, as she requested. But this photograph was already well circulated across the internet. This creepy grave no longer exists. Number 3. Lilly Gray. The epitaph of Mrs. Gray reads, Lilly E Gray, June 6, 1881 to November 14, 1958, victim of the beast, 666. This inscription is pretty bizarre to say the least, and it has stirred every imaginable thought regarding demons and Satanism. But, as it turns out, there isn't really anything horrific about it, other than her husband's deeply suspicious view of the government. According to research conducted by Rochelle Hawkes, Elmer L. Gray, Lilly's strange husband, hated the police and the justice system because of his constant run-ins with the law. He even blamed the government for his wife's death. Elmer Gray was an angry conspiracy theorist who was probably referring to the U.S. government as the satanic beast written on poor Lilly's gravestone. Number 2. Giles Corey. Giles Corey's headstone reads, Giles Corey, pressed to death, September 19, 1692. According to his epitaph, Giles Corey suffered an unimaginable death at the hands of Salem witch hunters. He had been arrested in April of that year and was accused of being a warlock. Instead of pleading guilty or not guilty, he remained silent on the matter. As was commonplace in those days, torture was used as a means to force a confession. Giles was initially loaded down with a board that covered his naked body. The board was piled with large, heavy stones, but he still refused to plead, and he remained silent without crying out. The board was removed and the stones were placed directly on top of Giles' body. But again, he said nothing except, "Lord, wait." His torturers complied and put even more weight upon him until he finally died, 2 days after his torture began. Number 1. Specimen's Grave. The state of Ohio Asylum for the Insane has an inactive graveyard located in Franklin County, Ohio. It was used to bury indigent patients of the Columbus State Hospital and unclaimed children who died at the nearby Juvenile Detention Center. The detention center is also known as the Training Institute of Central Ohio, or TICO. About a quarter of the tombstones contain the names of the deceased. The others are simply marked with an M or F to identify the gender, followed by numerals. But the most bizarre grave at the cemetery is a tombstone that simply states Specimens. Tico provided maximum security incarceration for serious juvenile felony offenders and had a pretty bad reputation. There was also widespread reporting of abuses occurring there. A 1981 government report by the National Criminal Justice Reference Center stated that Tico was an example of an institution that imposed substantial suffering and punishment on their inmates. Examples cited include rapes, severe beatings by the guards, and children who were reportedly released but in actuality died there. The specimen's grave is unique because nobody really knows what's buried under the stone. We can assume that whatever lies here is human, but anything more would just be speculation. One hypothesis is that the grave houses the remains of human body parts, organs, and tissues that were removed through surgeries or used for research. Does this grave simply house kidneys, tumors, and limbs of patients and juvenile offenders? Your guess is as good as ours.